Hello, and welcome to the candidate interviews for the 2015 municipal election. This is brought to you by Citizens for Environmental Balance and taped here in Newburyport's community studio, PortMedia, located on Graff Road. Citizens for Environmental Balance, or CEB, is a grassroots volunteer citizens group dedicated to ensuring that the people's voice is heard during public debate regarding the important issues that will have a long-term impact on the quality of our community's environment and our children's future. One of our mission goals is to present factual information so that informed decisions can be made regarding the future of the community. Citizens for Environmental Balance has, for a number of local elections, run candidate interviews. This is a series of one-on-one interviews with candidates for the City Council positions. All candidates have been invited to participate to air their stance on issues and to present themselves to us, the citizens of Newburyport. Each candidate has been given a list of questions 48 hours in advance of his or her interviews in order to prepare. Each candidate shall be asked the same questions. Follow-up questions will be asked as needed, and these will vary. I'm Dennis Chambers. I'm a resident of Federal Street and a registered voter here in the city, and I have essentially formulated these 10 questions. Each candidate's interview will air on the local access channels throughout the remainder of the season. In addition, the interviews will be posted on the internet for those without cable. May the voters be informed. Hello, I'm Dennis Chambers with Citizens for Environmental Balance. I'm here with Mr. Barry Connell, who is running for another term on City Council at large. Mr. Connell, welcome.
How are you, Dennis?
Welcome to our interview. Very nice. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Take a minute, if you will, and tell us a little bit about yourself, your education, your background.
All right. I don't know how far you want to go, but you know, as
recent history, I would say.
Okay, because I was going to start out with, I started out as a child,
close to
the old
mother
gag.
at the time.
Yeah, I've been in Newburyport now since the late 1970s. Married, 2 kids, both of whom attended Newburyport schools and have successfully moved on in their careers now, and I guess I consider myself fortunate. Neither of them's living in my basement, so they must have done something right here at the schools. Excellent. And living here in town. I'm an educator. My background, I started out in public education. Actually spent 8 years after my first 6 years of teaching, spent 8 years in the State House as director of a legislative committee working for our state representative, and it was an interesting experience, I'll tell you there.
It was your first connection with politics?
It was. And then served on the Zoning Board of Appeals when Ed Mullen appointed me. Subsequent to that, started my own environmental consulting group. We did environmental research and advocacy work, primarily in the area of hazardous waste and household wastes. Mm-hmm. Then went back to education. I had a kind of a change of heart. We had done a couple of contracts with the state, cleaning out school chemical laboratories and stock rooms around the state, and said, geez, what was wrong with me? Why did I leave schools? And that's where I've been since that time.
Really? Is that what got you back? Isn't that interesting?
It was. It was a great experience, and I enjoyed it. Huh. But I think that education was always my first love, and that's where I still am today.
Let's jump right into one of the bigger issues facing the city, the taxpayers, the residents, and that is the coming arrival, the advent of New England development, if you will. Mr. Karp and his many millions of dollars, right?
Well, maybe more than millions. We'll see.
Are going to be establishing footholds in our fair city. What do you think about all of that?
Well, he's got a very strong foothold. He's snapped up a lot of the commercial real estate in the downtown retail area. And it's remarkable that he did so rapidly, because he obviously had something in mind when he did it.
That was a while ago, though, wasn't it?
It was, and I think we've been waiting. It's kind of like the end of the Vietnam War, pieces at hand, or maybe Mr. Karp's development is at hand, maybe it's just around the corner, maybe it's next month. I don't know when he's going to develop it.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
They're very tight-lipped. Mm-hmm. They're not terribly responsive to inquiries. I guess if I was to summarize my thoughts on that development, it's wait and see what they bring forth, and see how we're going to respond to it. But overall, if someone's going to develop property in Newburyport, I'd rather them do it with deep pockets rather than shallow pockets.
That's an interesting take on that. I like that.
Well, the reason being that a developer who's trying to do things on the cheap is going to cut corners.
Right.
And eventually, that's going to leave a pretty shoddy product on the streets of Newburyport. Well, we do in many different ways. But for the most part, I think that they have the wherewithal to do something well, and it's our job to make sure that they do it very well.
Good. Speaking of the taxpayers in the city, what's your take on them, on us, me, you?
All of us, yeah.
Yeah, are we being taxed enough, too much, too little? Where do we stand in the city?
Well, it's always easy to say all taxation is too much taxation, but I think that there's a reasonable amount of money you have to spend, and I don't resent spending it personally, as long as what I'm getting is what I bargained for. We have good schools, and according to the recent ratings, better than they had been in previous years. You know, we're moving in the right direction. The trend is up and down and up and up, but generally the trend is upward. Our rankings—
Over 10 years, 15 years?
Well, over 10, 15 years, as long as I've been tracking it. And right now we're in the upper quarter, perhaps in the upper 20% of the quality of the schools, according to the ratings that are being done. Our kids are getting into good colleges. They're successful when they get out. So that's one measure of success, but there are a lot of others. You know, we have a vibrant downtown. We have a productive industrial base out in the Dexter Green. Properties are not deteriorating, they're still appreciating. And if you look at what happened over the last 8 years or so, we went into a terrible recession. But in terms of our comparison to other communities, we bounced back faster than any surrounding community or virtually any other community in Essex County to where we had been previously. Wish we hadn't gone into a recession, but our property values have been sustained by the commitment of individuals to maintaining their own property. And hopefully, I think, one of the contributing factors to that was the fact that we've been maintaining our infrastructure reasonably well. We've spent an awful lot of money on our water system, which had been deteriorating over about a 30-year period and had not been adequately maintained. When I was chairman of the Utilities Committee on the City Council, I spent a lot of time working through that process, making sure that when we replaced the clear well, we not only had an adequate supply, but we had a good supply of water. Same thing with the sewer plant, although it still has some problems, the odor being the one that's most noticeable. But we have a lot of capacity, and since our repair and renovation of the sewer plant, the quality of the effluent, which eventually ends up in the river, has been outstanding, and it's really used in the regional environmental community as a benchmark for others to try to strive and attain.
I was going to ask you specifically about the sewage and water systems, but you've mentioned it already. Do you have anything else you'd like to add concerning that topic?
Well, I would like to come back to that in a moment, but I also left something out, and that is one of the things that I think I'm most proud of, and the City Council in general, and the Mayor certainly is the fact that our fiscal situation has been very highly judged by the rating agencies, the bonding agencies. We have the highest municipal bond rating in Massachusetts. There are some other communities on our level, but we're now enjoying the benefits of that, so that when we borrow for a sewer plant or a water plant, as you have to do, and you push those bonds out into the marketplace, we get a very favorable interest rate, and that saves hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money every year. The result, I think, of good management and prudent decisions by the council as well.
So that the people who rate our city then take all of that into account, the planning ability of the city, the infrastructure that we already have, the financial character of the...
They do, and it's an interesting process to observe, and one that I scratch my head over sometimes, but they develop different kinds of indices, things such as, how much debt do you carry in comparison to the breadth and the quality of your property tax base? How much of the property that you own is slated for some kind of development that might also pay for itself? That's one of the other indices they look for. They don't want you building stuff for which you have no revenue stream to support. So it's an annual basis, an annual review that is done, and sometimes more than annually. They do updates on the reviews that they've done. But right now, we're in an awfully good position.
Isn't that good news? That speaks to the quality of what everybody's doing in town.
Well, I think it's the quality, not just of governance. I don't think government can claim exclusive credit for that.
People love this city.
People love the city. They're committed to this city. I've sometimes said that you can't spit on the sidewalk without having 5 people stand around, point to it, have a heated discussion, and start a petition. And it's an activist community. People take charge of things. They believe passionately in what they do, whether it's the waterfront, whether it's the water and sewer, whether it's the development and the renovation of our central firehouse into an arts center. People believe passionately in what they're doing, and I think it shows, as they do in their own homes. They take great pride in maintaining their property, and that's an awfully big part of the equation.
What about the Newburyport city budget? I've talked with other candidates about that. It seems that the council has somewhat to say about it, but not a whole lot to say about it.
Well, that's a somewhat frustrating, a somewhat frustrating process. We don't get to add anything in any line item of the budget. We only have the opportunity to cut things. The mayor proposes a budget, gives a budget to us, and we, through a rather lengthy process of evaluating what's before us, decide to fund some things at the full level that the mayor's recommended or reduce them somewhat. I have to say that over the years I've worked with now quite a number of mayors over my 12 years on the council. And I think that I've learned that through the budget process it's not quite as cut and dry as I've just described it. That in fact, if you're going to build a good budget and you want something, you've got to get in there early and say, look, Mayor, I think this is where we ought to place some greater emphasis and reduce some of the emphasis elsewhere. And the Mayor's been responsive to that kind of an approach and appreciates the input. She can't be everywhere, but we have 11 sets of eyes and ears out in the community, and sometimes the recommendations that we would make differ from the ones that she might have wanted to make at the outset.
So people in the council and in the mayor's office are well-intentioned in your view.
Yeah. In my perfect world, each election cycle, I think each of us look at the slate of candidates and say, gee, if I could take this person and that one and these two over there, that would be my... But that's not the way it works. And frankly, it shouldn't work that way.
I could go for free ice cream, actually.
Yeah, I would.
If you can put that...
Put it under a slice of pie, that's fine with me. But the fact is, voters make those decisions. And in my experience, and I can say this in all honesty, I've never come across a person on that council who didn't have the best interests of the community in mind. People do care, and they care in a different way on the council because they're so intimately involved in what's being done day to day. And I've enjoyed working with people who I never would have met under any other circumstance, and look forward to trying it, for another 2 years.
Well, in some ways, it is a big sacrifice of your time and energy.
It is,
but it has its own payment in the fact that you're getting things done that you feel are good for the city, that are good for the people who live here.
That's right.
So it's a contributory thing as well as taking time and energy from your own life.
No, you said that correctly. There are times when you're going to that third or fourth meeting in a week, right, and you're away every night at dinner time or rushing out the door to go to a meeting or to meet on a matter that may or may not interest you an awful lot. But that's the way it is. I mean, someone has to take responsibility for making decisions. And as you said, it's the satisfaction you get over helping shape the direction that the city's headed in. And I think we're headed in a positive way. I'd like to think that the work that I've done and that my colleagues have done on the council has contributed to that positive direction.
Excellent. Can we talk a little bit about free cash?
Mm-hmm. It's a misnomer if there ever was one.
It's a term that drives me insane. But I've asked everyone who's been kind enough to sit here and go through this what they thought about free cash, and I'm asking you as well.
Free cash is a misnomer because what it is the revenue that's been collected, left over and unexpended at the end of the year.
Not assigned to some other
Not assigned to
thing.
a particular purpose. And you make your best estimates at the start of a budget cycle. And
you
say,
do want free cash then?
Well, we certainly want to have some free cash there. We make our best revenue estimates about what we think is going to happen in the real estate market and what we can expect to collect in tax revenue. on that basis, you build a budget. Now, Newburyport is in the enviable position of bringing in more of, having set a tax rate, more of the revenue, a little bit more than we anticipated over the last several years. And we have a free cash position of about $1.6 million right now, $1,600,000. On a $55 million budget, we're talking about 2 or 3%. I don't think that's an unreasonable
It's about right.
amount to have left over at the end of the year. We have to expend it. There are certain circumstances under state law that allow us to carry it over until the next year. But we can't continue to pile up free cash. We really are required to either adjust our taxation down or to spend it so that we start at, with a level playing field each year. And I think that, again, this is one of the things that showed up in those bond reports, that we had a strong free cash position.
Yeah.
We didn't have an extreme amount, but we had enough of a cushion there so that if something went wrong, we could cover our expenses and not have to run back to the bond markets and borrow money that we hadn't anticipated borrowing.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sidewalks. Let's talk about sidewalks. I know. I'm making everybody go through this stuff.
To every incumbent, I know you get the same response. It is the bane of our existence. Honestly, for a period between, well, when the Cashman brothers, and you'll see those little medallions, Cashman brothers, poured the concrete sidewalks all around the city in the 40s and 50s and 60s.
Yeah, I have one myself in front of my
There
garage.
you go. Until fairly recently, we paid very little attention to sidewalks. And I think when the city was in the doldrums, before the renovation and the revitalization of the downtown,
Right. Late 60s?
I think these were the things, these are the things that were really left untended, among others, but particularly the sidewalks. When you walk up and down the same sidewalk every day, you don't notice when it's deteriorating until you trip and fall down.
You fall.
It's kind of like, what they say, boiling a frog. If you
Sure.
raise the temperature slowly, it's the frog's environment. The frog never realizes until the water's boiling that it's too late.
Right.
Unfortunately, we let our sidewalks crumble into disrepair, and that's an expensive item. When I first was on the council, we had a line item in the budget of $25,000 annually for sidewalk repair.
Oh, please.
Which is a drop in the bucket. I mean, a drop in a big bucket. We thought we were making progress I believe it's 4 budget cycles ago, when we doubled it to 50. Still a pittance compared to what it really costs to maintain all the sidewalks and replace those that need to be repaired. So with the institution of some designated revenue streams within the fee structure of the city, we've upped that. And I wish at the top of, had on the tip of my tongue the amount, but we'll spend somewhere about $250,000 to $300,000 on sidewalk repairs this year. And I think that's a more realistic number, but we're still working through a backlog of neglect. It's not going to be done tomorrow. It's not going to be done next year or the year, but over the 5 to 10 year time frame, I think things are going to be appreciably improved.
Everybody's talking about it for sure. So
Yeah. And if you go knocking on doors, which is the way I go out to meet people and do my campaigning, that's one of the first things on everybody's lips.
Is it?
Yeah, streets and sidewalks. I mean, it's the one thing that is tangible that everyone observes day to day, and it can be a real irritant. There are places, particularly because trees, buckle up sidewalks, and that's a challenge in and of itself. You don't want to take the tree down, but we love the shade trees, and they add value to our property and cool us in the summer and keep the winds from knocking us over in the winter. But
no, I was knocked over this last winter.
Were you? Yeah. Well, this winter we were knocked over by a lot. But you got to balance off the trees and the sidewalks, and we've experimented with the different kinds of surfaces that would allow the trees to, their roots to get the water they need to survive, yet still provide a surface that you can walk on without stumbling, or if you're confined to a wheelchair, you have to have public access to all the city's
or a young mom
streets and
pushing
sidewalks.
a carriage, a baby carriage.
Exactly. I ride my bike a lot, and I saw a woman going down Monroe Street about 6 months ago with a little kid in a carriage like that, and exactly, as you just stated, hit a rut, ba-boom, and I could see the baby elevate and plop back down in her. The thing is, the kid didn't even wake up. But, you know, no one should have to put up with that. Yeah.
For 10 seconds, can we revisit the sewer idea? Are you sanguine about it? We're going to have that problem fixed.
I hope so. You know, when we first started that project, we were developing the specifications, what we wanted to do. We were told that the majority, 60% to 2/3 of the odors came from the sludge management end, because that was done in the open. And the sludge is the solid component of the wastewater that's treated there. Clean water goes out to the river after the treatment process, but you got the sludge left over. We send it through Agrisource down to Ipswich to be composted with wood chips and brought back as a fertilizer that people pick up at the stump dump, out at the leaf dump. And so we enclosed that entire portion of the plant. We should have measured or been able to appreciably note an improvement in performance. And in fact, we had a filter press system that was antiquated. We went to a different type of sludge management and dewatering system, but it's all enclosed now. We still have what I seem to detect is an odor problem that's comparable to what it was before. Mm-hmm. So now you go to the other end of the plant, where the gases throughout the plant are filtered through a biofilter. We never touched the biofilter. And at the time when we were speccing it, and since I have some background in wastewater and has done some consulting work, I said, well, why don't we take a look at that? Do we have to change the filter media? Do we have to make it a deeper and more effective filter that way? Because there are trade-offs then, because the throughput or the flow through it is usually retarded when you make it just deeper. Do we need to expand the footprint and make a bigger filter system? Those are the sort of things that are being recommended now after the fact.
Right.
I don't think I had a crystal ball. It just seemed common sense to me, but I think a lot of people said the same thing at the time.
I could talk about sludge and gases all night long, but how about if we move over to the garage that's coming onto Titcomb Street? Yeah.
You know, I've been through several iterations of proposed solutions for the parking problems that we have occasionally downtown, and it is occasional.
Yeah.
It's not all the time. You know, I'm trying to think back, and I think that in the last study that I recall, there were 16 or perhaps 19 days out of the year where truly we are overwhelmed. And most of those, or at least some of those, are during Yankee Homecoming or weekend festivals.
That's not much, really.
That isn't. Nonetheless, it does indicate that we need some more capacity. And on an interim basis, you know, we've kind of patched things together by putting cars down on the central waterfront. And I don't know about you, but I've never seen a car that appreciates a view. You know, there's no point in having them down there if we have an alternative. So different mayors have proposed different solutions. I think the Titcomb Street solution is the best of several competing proposals we've had. We're talking about reconfiguring the building now so as to minimize its visual impact, which is, you know, it's right by one of the gateways to the city as people come over the bridge from Salisbury.
You're thinking of a 3-story building, right?
Yeah, well, it'll be a multi-story building. It looks like a 3-story building right now with a ramp system. Somewhat similar in scope to the parking garage behind the Athenaeum up in Portsmouth.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's roughly the scale that we're talking about. We'll have enough capacity there to take the cars that are presently parked in the central waterfront off to Titcomb Street. Now that somewhat changes the center of gravity of our parking, which means people coming to shop in the downtown will have a somewhat longer walk to State Street, to Market Square, the area where everyone wants to visit because it's beautiful and the shops are thriving down there for the most part. So I think it's not the best proposal, but it's the best compromise proposal. And I think that with the combination of state and federal funding, it'll be reasonably affordable. And then the money that we borrow to build that garage will be retired with revenues from the people who park there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you give us a minute or two on the central waterfront? Always of interest to people in town. Or 20 minutes.
Yeah, you know, I could talk for... I've been here since 1978, and I distinctly remember 2 headlines that I read in the Daily News. And I'm going to paraphrase them. One was a local issue that has nothing to do with this, but the other one was, and the first paper that I recall reading, solve the parking problem or the city is going to deteriorate again. Revert into its former state of decay.
Sure.
the end of the world is coming. Well, it hasn't come. We've somehow stitched together a reasonably effective parking system, not ideal. So I think that finally we have a reasonable proposal that offers some long-term solutions that we haven't had before at the Titcomb Street location. Under my ideal world, we would have put a second deck on the Green Street lot, since that was already a dedicated footprint for parking.
Right.
But that was, the chamber just couldn't accept that, and I think rightfully so. It would have been very tough on the merchants downtown to lose Green Street for a year while we build a second level on it. I understand that.
Yeah.
So I think what we have now is a pretty good proposal. The price tag is ridiculous. Parking is expensive. There's no such thing as free parking. When people say, "Oh, free parking in our town," yeah, you pay for that. You pay in one way or another. You pay for the parking. Parking never is free. Part of that proposal is tied to Mr. Karp right now. The Karp group wants to do a development in the general area underneath the Gillis Bridge toward the Black Cow. We've seen some conceptual drawings. But they're in negotiations with the mayor about giving to us the parking footprint that we need on Titcomb Street, which is land that they own, in exchange for access for vehicles that would otherwise have to be parked somewhere on their development site. And I think that's a fair trade-off. As long as we get all of the cars off the central waterfront, to move them up. Now, you asked about the central waterfront. I'm one of the dissidents who looked at that property and said that the NRA has done a good job in many respects. They've kept our options open for 40 years. They've tried a number of different ideas out on the public, none of which garnered a lot of support, and they were somewhat indecisive, frankly, at times. But at this point, we still have that central waterfront to do what we will with it. Everyone you talk to says, "Oh yes, I'd like the waterfront to be wide open." Great, but there's a cost to that. To build a decent park there with the infrastructure you need, the underground drainage, the underground water detention, sewer lines, water lines that have to be crossed,
and no revenue from the space, right?
And no revenue from the space anymore. You have to pay for it. And people say, "Well, if Portsmouth did it, look at Prescott Park." Great idea. Find me a Josie Prescott with deep pockets to pay for it, because that's how they did that. They not only were given by the Prescott sisters the parcels upon which Prescott Park was built, but they wanted it named after their sainted brother who had made a pile of money on Wall Street and gave the city of Portsmouth an endowment to maintain it in perpetuity. On top of that, they went into an agreement with the University of New Hampshire Ag School to maintain those gardens as a project for the university. So
What's not to like, huh?
Yeah, it's a win-win for everybody. So the taxpayers aren't burdened with anything. I haven't looked recently at their website. I did a year or so ago when I met with the Committee for an Open Waterfront, so I had that in my mind at the time. But there are still several $1 million in that endowment to maintain the park and to support the dramatic productions that they put on out there in the summer, which are a lot of fun. Yeah. So find me a Josie, we'll do it that way. Without Josie, it's going to come out of taxpayers' pockets. And let's say $2 million, that's about $100 per head, for every resident of the city.
Right.
I'm not sure if you told people that, look, you've got a family of 4, your share for this park will be $400.
We'll take a check.
I'm not sure if you posed questions about the central waterfront to people that way, if they'd feel quite the same way about it. I don't know. But I think that the NRA did us a service by saying, here are the economic realities there. Either you generate some revenue on site, or this is the scale if you want to maintain this as a park space. This is what it's going to cost us.
Let's wrap up our discussion with a topic that I know is important to you. You've been interested in it for many years, and that is historic preservation in the city.
Yeah. When Susan and I were first married here in Newburyport and looked for our first home, we found an old, I won't say decrepit, but it wasn't a shining example of historic preservation when we bought it, a 1770s colonial down on Milk Street. And boy, it was a project. You know, started with the roof, clapboards, sills, and then went inside. And if you saw me in those years, you know, I always had a glob of plaster stuck to my shirt, or dust on my shoes, or paint streaks on my hands, because you know, we restored that house, and we were proud to do it. It was a great house. It still is. And we moved up to the north end when our son was about 2 years old. I think historic preservation is very personal to me. Not just because of that experience, but because it's what drew us to Newburyport in many respects. I was living in Portsmouth, Susan was down in Boston. We said, we're somewhere in between, because we were working in different places. Somewhere in between is the right place for us. And we came over that bridge and looked here and said, that's it. Why? And I think a lot of other people felt the same way. You look at the built environment that represents, from the time of the Revolution and sometimes earlier to the present, all the major architectural styles are present here. Going up and down High Street, when you have guests come in from out of town, their jaws just drop. I mean, their mouths are open.
It's a national treasure, I think.
It's fabulous. You know, we had such a struggle over maintaining that scenic byway of High Street, when the state wanted to come in and put all sorts of bump outs and change the character of it. You know, I think that was an expression of the kind of support we have for historic preservation across the board here. It's one of the things that makes the city unique. Miraculously, we've done so without imposing an historic preservation district on the city. And I think that is somewhat miraculous. We've taken a couple of other steps partway in that direction to have some institutional protections. You know, we have a demolition delay ordinance in place. You know, when you have an historic property, you've got to attend to its physical appearance, because that is, in part, that is the brand of Newburyport. It's a great place, and I want to continue to live in a great place. I credit the Preservation Trust and all the folks who have done wonderful things to their own properties with maintaining them the way they do. I'm going to do everything I can to see that continues.
You may have the last word if you like it.
Ooh, it's dangerous. The only thing I'd like to say is that my wife actually questions my sanity occasionally around this city council service, and she knows that I care about it. But every 2 years she says, "You really want to do this again?" And yeah, I do. I've tried to serve the best interests of the community in every respect. That doesn't mean I agree with everyone. It doesn't mean that I agree with the majority of people in some cases. But my judgments are always informed and always made on the basis of what I think is best for the city overall, in the long and short term. You know, we built schools. When before I was in the council, I headed up the debt exclusion project to get our library built. I did the same thing for the high school to get that off the ground. I was proud to work with Port Pride on the construction of our new elementary school. And I think those kind of projects, those bricks and mortar projects, are the sort of things that really get my juices flowing. Even a sewer treatment plant.
I hear that.
and I do hope we're going to solve that problem finally. Yeah, I'd like to be reelected. And I hope that the voters appreciate what I've done. And if they disagree with me, I know they'll tell me. They always do. For 2 more years. I'm just asking for one of their 5 votes.
Mr. Barry Connell is running for City Council at large. Thank you, Barry, for your time
Thank
and
you.
for your efforts.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hope to do it again.